I request all of you to put your phones on silent mode or switch them off. The proceedings will start soon. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Aishwarya Mahesh, a fourth-year law student from Sastra University, and I'm extremely happy to take you through the proceedings of New Ideas for a New India, 2016, Idea of an Ideal India, brought to you by Sastra University in association with The Hindu. Let us begin with a mellifluous invocation to be rendered by R. Madhuvanti, a Sastra graduate from the 2008 batch. I request you all to be seated in devotional silence. Thank you.
मैत्रीं भजत अखिलहृजेत्रीं मैत्रीं भजत अखिलहृजेत्रीं मैत्रीं भजत अखिलहृजेत्रीम् आत्मवदेव परानपि पश्यत आत्मवदेव परानपि पश्यत युद्धं त्यजत स्पर्धां त्यजत युद्धं त्यजत स्पर्धां त्यजत त्यजत परेष्वक्रममाक्रमणं त्यजत परेष्वक्रममाक्रमणं मैत्रीं भजत अखिलहृजेत्रीं जननी पृथिवी कामदुघास्ते जननी पृथ्वी कामदुघास्ते जनको देवः सकल दयाळु जनको देवः सकल दयाळु धाम्यत तता दयत्वं जनता धाम्यत तता दयत्वं जनता श्रेयो भूयात् सकलजनानां श्रेयो भूयात् सकलजनानां श्रेयो भूयात् सकलजनानां श्रेयो भूयात् सकलजनानां श्रेयो भूयात् सकलजनानां.
I have the pleasure of inviting Dr. S. Vaidya Subramaniam, Dean Planning and Development of Shastra University, to welcome the august gathering.
Very distinguished panelists, an intellectual audience of Chennai. I'm extremely happy to welcome all of you on behalf of Shastra University and the Hindu for this defining moment, which probably in 3 hours from now will give you a solution, a big answer to a difficult but a fundamental question. What is the idea of an ideal India? The theme for this evening's panel discussion, the thought process, was seeded, and the germination that we see today as the theme for this evening's discussion happened last year in the second edition of New Ideas for a New India, when the speaker, Mr. S. Gurumurthy, who also spoke in the previous edition, challenged, and he was prepared to take the challenge, that we need a high quality debate on the idea of India. And he desired that it need to be organized by, again, Shastra University and the Hindu. And that is why this evening, Shastra University and the Hindu, in its third edition of the New Ideas for New India, has chosen this theme. Little did I realize that it is not only Shastra University and the Hindu that got together, but 2 speakers who are also affiliated with these 2 institutions have also come here as speakers. Mr. N. Ram, the chairman of the Kasturi and Sons and the former editor-in-chief of the Hindu, as well as Mr. S. Gurumurthy, who holds the distinguished research chair professorship in legal anthropology at Shastra University. Doubling the intellectual output is in the form of this duo from Delhi, Mr. Sitaram Yechury and Dr. Swapan Das Gupta. I recall when I met Mr. Yechury in one of the marriages in Delhi, I requested him to be a speaker for this evening's theme, and when he asked me what the topic is, I told him it is the idea of India, and he immediately consented to my request and agreed, because he shared with me that he has also produced a concept paper on the idea of India. I'm extremely thankful for that, sir. And Dr. Swapan Das Gupta, for whom this visit associated with Shastra is the second visit, whose penchant for deep public policy analysis is well known to everybody. And both Mr. Yechury and Swapan Das Gupta missed a Shastra event last year, and I'm happy that they are filling the gap this year. And to this mercurially tempestuous topic, we have a moderator in the form of Justice Prabha Sridevan, the daughter of the Chennai soil. And who better a moderator can fill this space than Justice Prabha Sridevan. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely happy that we are duty-bound to welcome this distinguished panel by putting our hands together, because what we see today this evening is 300 plus years of accumulated wisdom packed in physical form in a single stage, talking on this contentious topic. So let's put our hands together and welcome this distinguished panelists. You see, I strongly believe that the brand of mainstream intellectualism charters the direction in which a country moves. Prosperous intellectualism is a symbol for progress. Adverse intellectualism has always been regressive. But what we see today in this panel is a prosperously diverse form of intellectualism. Because diversity is the hallmark of a vibrant democracy. And we are going to see how different views are going to emerge on this topic. It is in this diversity that lies multiple views that we will be listening to. Some would say that the culture of India, the philosophy of India has predated the Constitution. Some would say the economics of India, the sociology of India is the product of our Constitution. And sandwiched between these two thoughts is the emerging paradigms of what is actually true nationalism is all about. But ladies and gentlemen, it is very clear that the idea of India cannot be a victim of an intellectual cocktail that has confused the common man. And that is why we at Shastra University thought that it would be appropriate that we get best minds together and to clear this confusion as to what is the real answer to this tough question, idea of India. And when I shared the names of the speakers with some of my friends, immediately many of them recalled a similar meeting in 1991 in which Mr. Gurumurthy was one of the speakers. Mr. Ram himself recalled this meeting. He was one of the speakers. Mr. L. Ganeshan, who is sitting here as part of the audience, was the speaker that was organized by Vigil. But that was positioned as a debate. And invariably, a debate settles the fundamental question, who the winner is. But ladies, yeah, Mr. Arun Shori was also one of the speakers, a very distinguished orator, a scholar speaker himself. Invariably, a debate settles who the winner is. But ladies and gentlemen, this panel discussion this evening will settle what is the winning idea of India. And it is with this hope I thought I will lay down this as a backdrop as part of my welcome address. And I'm extremely happy to welcome all of you for this evening's deliberations. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, idea, ideology, and philosophy are now going to reverberate in the consciousness of the ideas of ideals, both in thought and theme. We have amidst us carefully chosen intellectuals who are ready to explode with their thoughts. But before they do so, their brief background will be an ideal kickstart to today's proceedings. Justice Prabha Sridevan is Chennai's own daughter. She served as a judge of the Madras High Court between 2000 and 2010, and later as chairman of the Intellectual Property Appellate Board between 2011 and 2013. She was also the chairman of a think tank to frame India's IPR policy, named as one of 50 most important persons in the IP world by Managing Intellectual Property in 2012, 13, and 15. Justice Prabha has, to her credit, landmark cases and landmark judgments that includes cases dealing with freedom of speech, child rights, illegal executive detention orders, gender equality, disability rights, mental health, protection of water bodies and the environment, rights of the depressed classes and Dalits, regulation of mining and sand quarrying, right to education, right to information, protection of heritage buildings and worth of the homemaker's work. She was also on the bench which decided the Novartis' challenge to the constitutionality of Section 3, Subclause D of the Patents Act. Her IPAB chairmanship settled, besides many important cases, our very own Talapakatti Biryani and Payyanur Pavitra Motiram GI. An author and regular columnist in leading dailies, Justice Prabha Sridevan is the moderator for today's panel discussion. May I now request Professor R. Sethuraman, the Vice Chancellor of Shastra University, to present a memento to Justice Prabha Sridevan.
speaker is presented with the Tanjavur painting as well as the first page of the Hindus edition that was during their birthday. So August 9th, Justice Prabhat Sridevan's birthday, and that's the first page of the Hindu.
Mr. Sitaram Yechuri is the General Secretary of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, and is a member of the Parliament in the Rajya Sabha. A veteran parliamentarian who graduated from St. Stephen's and JNU, Mr. Yechuri's political activism for larger public causes earned him a reputation of being a dynamic political thinker and strategist. He was the All India President of the Students' Federation of India, and in the Parliament is known for his unique style of debate and discussions on key impinging issues on policy concerns that are crucial to the people. Mr. Yechuri is an author and a powerful speaker, and I'm sure the audience here is all set to listen to Mr. Yechuri's oration. I request Professor R. Sethuraman to present a memento to Mr. Sitaram Yechuri. Mr. N. Ram, Chairman of Kasturi and Sons Limited, publisher and former editor-in-chief of the Hindu and group newspapers, is a political journalist. He has written on a range of socio-political subjects and specialized in investigative journalism. He has written on a range of socio-political subjects, and along with Susan Ram, he is a biographer of the Indian writer Mr. R.K. Narayan. Ram was elected president of the Contemporary India section of the 72nd session of the India History Congress in 2011. Honors include the Padma Bhushan for journalism in 1990, the Asian Investigative Journalist of the Year Award from the Press Foundation of Asia in the year 1990, the B.D. Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism in the year 1989, and a Columbia J School Alumni Award in 2003. I request Dr. S. Vaidya Subramaniam, Dean Planning and Development of Shastra University, to hand over a memento to Mr. N. Ram. Dr. Swapan Dasgupta is one of India's reputed political columnists. Having worked in almost all the leading publications in India in senior editorial positions, he has been an independent columnist since 2003. His political commentaries, laced with strong conservative inclinations, are published in the Times of India, Telegraph, Asian Page, Pioneer, and the Hindustan Times. He is a regular on India's TV news channels, particularly during elections. A St. Stephen's College graduate, Dr. Swapan received his doctorate from SOAS in 1980. He sits on the boards of Larsen & Toubro and Orient Cement. In 2015, he was awarded the Padma Bhushan. May I request Mr. Rajiv Lochan, CEO of The Hindu, to present a memento to Dr. Swapan Dasgupta. S. Gurumurthy is a thought leader known for his multidimensional intellect that ranges from economics to corporate affairs to finance to philosophy to journalism to chartered accountancy to sociology. Gurumurthy's brilliance is in his one-time profession of chartered accountancy, and his exceedingly astute legal skills made him a close and trusted counselor of Ramnath Goenka on all matters. Apart from his achievements as an investigative journalist and a writer, Gurumurthy's original thinking on economic issues, his influence over corporate India, his social activism added to his already powerful personality. Gurumurthy has a message for the elite and the ordinary, for the traditional and the modern, for the world as much for his own motherland, India. He also teaches at IIT Mumbai and is also distinguished research professor of legal anthropology at Shastra University. I request Mr. Rajiv Lochan to hand over a memento to Sri S. Gurumurthy. With such a power-packed panel on stage, it is time that I request Justice Prabha Sridevan to take over the proceedings of the panel discussion on the theme, Idea of an Ideal India. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening to all. When I was asked to be the moderator, I thought I would just have some 5 minutes time where I could get off with introducing the speakers, but then I was told that I had to speak for 20 minutes. I'm extremely thankful and deeply honored to be here this evening. Yesterday, people in some parts of India celebrated the New Year, Yugadi. So perhaps today is as good a day as any to find out what would be an idea for an ideal India or new ideas for a new India. The five of us are a bit confused about which one we are going to speak on. Maybe both are the same. The theme has captured the imagination and captured the interest of many. And I believe everyone has mentally substituted the word better for new. We are all hungry for better ideas for a better India. Traveling on our roads, a car driver may dream of smooth as silk roads and panoramic highways, whereas the pedestrian on our perilous pathways may ask for wide pedestrian pathways. Who has the right to say the one cannot dream the dream? When Dr. Vaidya Subramaniam said that I was going to be the moderator, my reflex action was a step back. It was hesitation. Then he read out the formidable list of panelists, 4 very strong, very intelligent, very articulate persons. Reflex action was a scurry for life. Then I said, pause, take a deep breath. Can there be an idea of India, new or old or ideal, without a woman? There can't be. So I had to say yes. Then I thought, pardon me if I err, that this was the first time Shastra has invited a woman to its much sought after and awaited discussions, either as a panelist or as a moderator. This was the most appropriate theme to break the glass barrier, and I'm very, very grateful that I was given the hammer to do it. A woman moderating the different and dissonant views of what should create an ideal and a new India. As a metaphor, it grabbed me. So here I am before you. Maybe I also represent the many unpresent and unrepresented faces and minds of India, whose ideals will have great value. But our poor hosts, Shastra and Hindu, how would they construct a dais for all the different groups in India to sit on? That is the beauty of India, and that is her reality. It is these diverse numbers, these huge numbers, that make us. And they should not be looked on as a drain on our resources. Our new ideas today should transform these huge numbers into our strength. It is how we look at it. Jugad need not be a pejorative term. It can become our strength, as Mangalyan demonstrated. And what is India? It was a geographical space possessing a unique unity before we became a country and a republic. Megasthenes in 4th century BC describes us as a place in the shape of a quadrilateral with Mount Hermodotus on the north, Indus on the west, and the eastern side onwards to the south by the great ocean. Bhattarika Sakalakirti, a Jain writer of the 12th century, describes Bharatam as Chapasadrishyam, that is like a bow. The head of the bow faces north, the two ends run east-west, and the stretched string traces to the south. Why even our Tamil Thai Varthu describes us as Bharatakandam, a woman whose forehead and the tilakam on it is the land of the Tamils. So India, this region, has been one in the eyes of ourselves and outsiders, even though she had many, many kingdoms with many, many rulers in it. Perhaps we are still that in a manner of speaking. Not much changes. Or as the French say it, it remains the same and it changes. When we came together as a free India, we all had new ideas for a new India. Even then, the ideas were different. And as far as the dawn of new India was concerned, the emotions covered a wide spectrum from unalloyed hope to a very skeptical one. There must have been many who did not even know that we became free. Mr. Motilal Sethalwad, presenting a paper on Indian federalism in 1953, said, I quote, "What is more than ever needed in India, with its traditions of caste, communal, and linguistic divisions, is an overpowering sense of a common Indian nationality and a passionate love for Indian unity," unquote. 63 years have gone by, and we are one in many ways. We come together as one on many occasions. There are divisions, undoubtedly, but at critical moments, the divisions just dissolve, as we saw when Chennai had the floods. And when the crisis passes, the differences become visible. As we saw again, when the waters receded, it was back to normal life. But that cannot nullify the fact that a common Indianness binds us. Dr. Swapan Das Gupta, a panelist, writes that Indianness is a term that includes emotion, history, and collective memory. I'm not sure every single citizen will put his Indianness into those words, but I'm sure there is a sense, a feeling in each one of them. Recently, the writer Ashokamitran was asked what his idea of India was. He answered in his inimitable, gentle way, "How can there be just one idea of India?" So true. Each one of us has her own idea of India and has the right to have her own idea for India. That accounts for all the jostling and the jousting that we see around us. How does one accommodate a space for all? There may be several of our own brothers and sisters in unreached spaces who do not know we have a constitution, but we have one. And that will calm the turbulence among the ideas that are going to come up today and probably in the days to come. We are a union of states. We promised to respect certain basic rights. The new ideas will have to accord with the Constitution and the promised rights. Even the unreached and the untaught will dream of new ideas, no matter that they do not know about the Constitution. Will the ideas that emerge today have enough space for all their dreams? The oneness, the inexplicable oneness amongst us, which is a paradoxical oneness, it tied us and freed us. That is why we stayed one. It shall free us and keep us together hereafter. This new India has to emerge from the past. No new India can grow cutting off the past. Only then it will be an India that is ours. James Madison considered that it is the glory of the people of America that while they had regard to the opinions of former times, they have not allowed blind veneration for antiquity, for custom, or names to overrule the suggestions of their own good sense, the knowledge of their own situation, and the lessons of their own experience, unquote. What he is talking about is balance. In India, we have a similar verse in Sanskrit which says, Puranamityeva nasadhu sarvam. What is old is always not good. Nachapi kavyam navamityavadhyan. It is not necessary to condemn all that is new. We have to have a balance, get the best out of each. In fashioning or imagining new ideas, if the balance is maintained, maybe all the ideas of all the people will be reasonably accommodated. Article 38 of the Constitution directs us to promote the welfare of the people in accordance with social, economic, and political justice. But words, are funny masters and rebellious servants, depending on how you look at them. In 1958, a learned judge of the Madras High Court wrote, if it could be possible for Confucius, Manu, Hammurabi, and Solon to meet together at a conference table, I doubt whether they would be able to evolve what constitutes social justice. We have brought together 4 wise men, and we will see if they can evolve what constitutes ideas for an ideal India or a new India. That's not the moderator's task. There are other words: development, health, innovation, environment, and many more. All these words mean different things to different people. To a Safai Karmachari, these 4 words may just mean one thing: toilets for everyone and freedom from his task. A wonderful new idea, in fact. It is a great challenge to make all these words meaningful in a positive way to everyone in ideal India or new India. The ideas must be daringly innovative, and our students must have the freedom to think. Albie Sachs, the great judge of South Africa, said, equality can be graveyard equality or vineyard equality. Graveyard equality flattens, vineyard equality lifts. So it is with systems of education. The education must uplift and expand and not constrict and dumb down. I believe then the ideas will flow and commonness and unity that Mr. Motilal Setalvad spoke of will happen. The love and sense of belonging for our country cannot be forcibly cultivated. They are spontaneous growth that will bloom in the right climate. And it has not been a bad 6 decades. You can't say it has not grown at all. In blazing May, please come and watch Tamil Nadu vote. Just see the first-timers, with what joy they come to vote. I'm sure they all feel a sense of belonging, that they are Indians and they are going to vote and make a change. Why are we resonating to this theme of ideal India, new India today, so many years after independence, and so many thousands of years since there was born an idea, a space that was called India? Are we seeing the emergence of a new social order, the buds of the constitutional aspirations? If yes, then status quo will change. If no, status quo will have to change. The comfort zone will be disturbed, but it is folly to think that it would be easy to build an ideal India. Is this then the best of times and worst of times? Then we are blessed. We are the ones time has chosen to create an ideal India for all. We dare not fail. The four respected panelists will have different and I'm sure conflicting views. This difference and this conflict are but the breaking and tossing of waves underneath. They are all bound by an abiding love and loyalty for India, each one of them. That is the rich ultramarine calm underneath. I wait like you with bated breath to know what they have to say, and may I say, with fear of infringement of copyright, the nation wants to know. Yes, Mr. Sitaram Yechuri.
Thank you, Madam Justice Moderator, and thanks for setting the template like you have set. But I'm a little apprehensive because if you have ended what you had to your opening remarks with saying that the nation wants to know, I'm a little hesitant to actually participate in this debate. But nevertheless, since you opened up, first of all, thank you very much, the Hindu and the Shastra University, for giving this opportunity to share some ideas with all of you, with a very distinguished audience here and my distinguished co-panelists. Yes, last year I was supposed to be here. But hearing the justice today, I'm happy I was not here last year because there was no woman on the stage, she said. So I don't feel guilty for that. So I'm here now. But I think, ma'am, you are absolutely right in saying that what is this idea of India? Every one of us will have our own idea of India. True, in these days of Bharat Mata Ki Jai, of course, we'll have when Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's Jai Hind as our idea, we'll have Bhagat Singh's Inqilab Zindabad also as our idea. All these are ideas. And remember, all the wars that India won, independent India, were won under one major slogan. There were many other slogans. The shout of saying Sat Sri Akal, Bolo Sonihal, Sat Sri Akal was the slogan, the war cry of all our soldiers who wear the pagdis of the Punjabis. That's as patriotic. In fact, more, they won wars for us, defended India. So in these days, yes, everybody will have an idea. But when we talk about an idea of India, we are talking, I think, about a legal constitutional manner in which we define the country which all of us love, all of us are part of, as India. Now, what is this idea of India? Now, I think this has a lot to do, and let me, go beyond the template of what has been said, that to try and understand how this huge country, with all the diversities all of us know, with everything, there's no other country comparable. How did it come together into forming a concept of India and evoking the best of qualities in human beings in the name of India and Indian unity? Now, this, I think, has a lot to do with our struggle for independence from the British. And like many eminent sociologists have pointed out, political scientists, the prodigious and sustained mobilization of our people that we witnessed during our struggle for freedom, particularly in the last 3 crucial decades of the struggle for independence, could not have been possible without an alternative and inclusionary ideal of an independent India. Now, what would this independent India be, which I still think is that India that I was born into? And that is that it was a concept that rejected the entire trajectory of the nation state and nationalism as it appeared in Europe when civilization was moving from your feudalism, feudal monarchies towards capitalism. The Westphalian Treaty or the peace agreement in the mid-17th century that laid down the notions of sovereignty, of nationalism, and the nation state. And all your international laws today are based on the treaties of Westphalia. All the laws that are there in the United Nations today are all based on those treaties. Now, what was that concept, and why do you say that India moved beyond that concept of modern lexicography of what is called a nation? That what emerged in the Westphalian Agreement was a compulsion to seek legitimacy for a new kind of a state, one that could no longer appeal to older notions of divine right of states, personified in their monarchs. It sought this legitimacy in a new form of political psychology, of a new kind of subject, the citizen, a psychology based on a feeling for a new form of entity that had emerged, and that was the nation. The feeling, which came to be called nationalism, had to be generated in the populace of citizens, and the standard process was that adopted in Europe. For generating it was to find an external enemy within the outsider, that is the other in one's midst. The Irish, the Jews, to give only two examples. I'll come to the Indian variant a little later, that these had to be despised and subjugated. In somewhat a later time, during the course of human civilizational advance, this came to be known as the minorities, and the expression of majoritarianism was considered to be an expression of nationalism. Now, India moved beyond this in terms of saying that there is no majority-minority. We are a country of equals, and that equality enshrined in our constitution went beyond the Westphalian concept of what is a nation, and went beyond many of the international jurisprudence today that governs the relations between nations. So the point that I want to make is that the idea of India is not a mere metaphysical concept. The idea of India was the product of a momentous and a very big people struggle against colonial rule, and it threw up this concept of an idea of India where it is the inclusiveness of the people that defines this idea of India. To put it in a nutshell, according to me, the drawing of the exploited majority of India, the drawing in of the numerous linguistic nationalities, the drawing in of the multi-religious Indian population, above all, the drawing in of all Indians in an inclusive path of economic and social justice. This constitutes the idea of India. Now, it is on this basis that we'll have to move to see what could be the ideal India to which we want to move. Now, any concept that goes back to the Westphalian concept of majoritarianism as being the core of nationalism is actually a throwback in our historical evolution and in the evolution of the thought process of modern India. And that is why today, when we talk about this sort of a throwback, majoritarianism versus minoritarianism, this sort of a throwback that we are witnessing today in various expressions that are currently happening now in our country, of intolerance, of various other campaigns that are currently happening, it's an effort to throw back the evolution of the Indian state the evolution of the concept of India back to the Westphalian concept of majority versus the minority. And that is regressive. An ideal India has to be progressive. And a progressive ideal India can only come when we talk in terms of converting the political independence that we have into the economic independence of our people. Now that will have to be, if that has to be achieved, without which I don't think this idea of India can survive. And India as a majoritarian state can never survive. And if that has to be prevented, this transition from our political independence, what you said, madam, there'll be, come when Chennai votes, people with great enthusiasm and interest come to vote. What Mr. Gurumurthy and I were whispering to each other is that, yes, the greater the participation of voters today is also the biggest stimulus package that you can offer in India is to hold an election. From the Tatas and the Ambanis to the ordinary rag picker, everybody makes their money. And in fact, some places where I go, when you go to the election campaign, when you go for campaigning, people come and tell me, he said, sir, why do we have this only once in 5 years? Why don't we have it every year? You could take that as a great expression of Indianness and of an idea of India. But then that hides the actual reality, that this is the only time when the people are heard. This is the only time when you're actually serving the people. So let's not, we have to move, I think, beyond these concepts of saying, you have quoted many of our ancient thinkers on this concept of idea of India, Bharatakande, Bharatavarshe. And when we learnt our Shastras, in the Shastra University, I can tell you this, we learnt our Shastras when we were very young. There was also, in the mantras, would come say, Jambudvipe, a giant island. A giant island is the description of India in our ancient Vedic rituals that I've also learned by heart and recited before I grew up into later levels of consciousness and moved towards Marxism. and that Jambudvipe nation and the nation of today. Please, for heaven's sake, let us also temperate. Yes, filter out the wisdom, learn from it. But what is the reality that we have today in our country? 1,614 languages, registered in your census. And how do we get in terms of 6,400 castes? 6 major religions, 4 of them born in this country. 6 anthropologically defined ethnic groups. That is India today. And that India today, how do we, first of all, keep that India, and what is the idea you have for the growth of that India? And that can only happen when we transform the political independence we achieved into the economic independence of our people. There, in order to protect myself from the charge that this is the constant refrain of a communist who keeps talking like this, let me invoke Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar in his 125th birth anniversary the country is observing. I think 25th of November, that's right, 25th of November 1949, he presents the draft constitution for commending it for approval to the Constituent Assembly. And while presenting the draft, he makes a small speech, and towards the end of his speech, he makes one, I think, very pertinent point, which has a lot to do with the idea of India that we are talking of. And that is, he says, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, that we have created with our labor a political structure where we have given, or this constitution will give, one man, one vote. I'm sure, ma'am, when Dr. Ambedkar was talking of one man, one vote, he meant women also. In those days, please don't take offense. In those days, man, unfortunate, but it was considered to involve women as well, include women as well. But he said, we have given one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. But, he goes on, the socio-economic conditions that we have, that contradictions that are there in our society, do not permit us to move towards one man, one value. We have given one man, one vote, and one vote, one value, but we have not given one man, one value. Until this contradiction is not erased, the entire political structure that we have so laboriously built will be thrown asunder by this growing socio-economic inequalities. What is nationalism today? Is it merely shouting Bharat Mata ki Jai? Nationalism for me would mean to move from that one man, one vote, one value, to one man, one value. That is true nationalism. Now, if you are not able to invoke that nationalism, what is this idea of India? And like you correctly said, you'll have different ideas. The people with the luxury cars and SUVs will want good highways. The pedestrians would want good pedestrian walkways. Now, that is why you'll have different ideas for different people, unless you have that equality. So, therefore, this conversion, and please recollect, the best of Indian minds, the best of Indian people, who have sacrificed for the freedom of this country, and who have inspired generations, continue to inspire even today. Bhagat Singh is one human being who can never get old. I mean, he's also a constant source of inspiration for generations all across the country. I don't know in this part of the of India, but all across. But what were all of them talking about? Conversion of the political independence into economic independence of our people. Now, this is what would be an ideal India that we'll have to move towards. That is, at the political level, any effort to try and throw back this concept of an idea of India into the Westphalian concept of majoritarianism versus minoritarianism, that is going to be a throwback that will rupture the entire concept of India, its unity and its progress. That is something that cannot be permitted. So at the political level, the idea is towards inclusion. And that inclusion will have to be both economic and social. And we seriously have to consider various other measures that will have to come in terms of the times for the realization of this social inclusion. At the economic level, this idea of India can only be concentrated not merely by lip service of converting political independence into economic independence, but at the economic self-reliant, self-sufficient economic foundations for this country of ours. If that is not strengthened, but instead you have policies of bartering away that as a part of your entire global phenomenon that is taking place, that will run against the grain of the ideal India that we are seeking. And at the social level, the question of social justice, the question of inequalities, caste inequalities, social inequalities, the faster we address them, only then we'll be able to unitedly move towards that ideal India. So therefore, in conclusion, what I'd like to state is, have we taken time or do you have? Huh? Okay. So therefore, the point, to summarize what I've been saying so far, is that the idea of India as a concept itself was a contribution that India has made to political thought and political philosophy globally at the time of our independence, when we moved beyond the current Westphalian concepts of nationhood and sovereignty. We coalesced together a nation which many, including Winston Churchill, said that it cannot be a country for very long. There were many doomsday predictions that this country cannot remain together. But it all came together on the basis of that psychological makeup. Yes, we have our diversities. we'll all be together, and that idea of India we thrown up was a unique contribution to the process of world political thought. Now, that idea of India was based on the premise of what we have enshrined in our constitution that Madam Justice has encapsulated very well, and those concepts of equality, fraternity, and liberty. That is what ties us together. And that's constitutional order. If that is disrupted, then this idea of India doesn't remain. That's why any movement that goes back to that majoritarianism and minoritarianism has to be defeated. Otherwise, this idea of India will not survive. And if that has to survive and strengthen, we have to move towards consolidating our political independence through the economic independence of our people. If that has to be done, we have to achieve at the political level, at the economic level, and at the social level. We have to achieve that equality that we promised in the Constitution, that fraternity between our peoples, irrespective of the creed that we promised in our Constitution, and that social justice that we have promised in our Constitution. Ideal India would be when we are able to achieve this. Now finally, if you'll give me 2 minutes, I'll just take, you see, what we are seeing today in India is actually a battle of visions. That was thrown up again during the freedom struggle. To put it in a nutshell, one vision was that of the Congress, which led the freedom struggle at that point of time, which talked in terms of the future of India. The character of independent India would be a secular democratic republic. You had the left, the stream that I represent, which said a secular democratic republic in itself is not as, it's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition, as economists would call. Because unless you move towards economic independence of all our people, that is towards a socialistic order, this political independence itself cannot be sustained. As opposed to these two, was the third expression, which had a twin expression, was the third vision. And this third vision had twin expression that the character of India will be defined by the religious affiliation of its peoples. Thus emerged the concept of Hindu Rashtra and the concept of Islamic State. The partition, unfortunately, settled that Islamic State business with the formation of Pakistan. But that battle of a secular democratic republic moving towards an ideal India, of achieving or converting a political independence into economic independence, achieving political, social, and economic justice, that is a continuing vision. The struggles are on for that. But then this vision of converting into a majoritarianism in India, of that Hindu Rashtra, that remains, and that is the regression. So that is where we stand today. That is where, if you want to test my loyalty, I'll say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. But if you want to test my passion to build an ideal India and to build an ideal idea of India, then we have to move, and the foundation has to be the parameters and the template set by the Indian Constitution. And I think that's the direction in which we'll have to move. So I thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts with you, and thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yachuri. You didn't exceed the time, don't worry. So, according to him, one man and one value, an alternative and inclusionary idea that India had and where India led the world, would be the idea for an ideal India. Now we have Dr. Swapan Das Gupta.
Madam Chairperson, my distinguished fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly grateful to Dr. Vaidya Subramaniam for inviting me to Shastra, another occasion hosted by Shastra and the Hindu. and not least of which because I quite enjoy always speaking in Chennai, because this is one of the few cities where I'm not invariably heckled and told to speak in Hindi, a language which a language where my inadequacies often come out very powerfully. Just before we came down to the stage, I was privy to a very, very interesting discussion being conducted by the Tamil majority in this in this panel. And the discussion was fascinating because the discussion touched on various things. Discussion touched on the legacy of M.S. Subbulakshmi. The discussion touched on the affairs of the Kanchi Mutt and similar things. And this is a discussion you would not get in Delhi. Not least of which is because Chennai is a very rooted city. It has a powerful sense of its own identity. And when Sita, he and I, we went to the same college, so he'll pardon me if I don't refer to him by Mr. Yechuri, despite his elevated status in the hierarchy of comrades. So when Sita talks about how the various chants of the Indian Army, and he spoke about Bole Sonyal, Sat Sri Akal, he could have talked about Jai Gorkhali. He could have talked about the Maratha regiment, which talks about Maharaja Chhatrapati Shivaji ki Jai. These are various chants which are taken up. And they reflect a certain ethos. The ethos of India. Madam Chairperson, in your introductory remarks, you spoke about the stimulus provided by the graveyard and the stimulus provided by the vineyard. I thought it was a wonderful analogy. In large circles, the discussion which we were having upstairs, I was just a passive observer of that, would have been called the stimulus of the graveyard. Because it's talking about a past. It's talking about something which goes back to antiquity. That would be the stimulus of the graveyard. Now, what would be the stimulus of the vineyard would be something more heady. Would be if you sort of shout your hands and shout Azadi and you shout Bharat ke Barbadi, translated, the destruction of India. Now, I thought the common basis of the idea of India is believing in India. You cannot have an idea of India or ideas of India if it starts off with the premise that there shouldn't be an India. That's why I'm a little puzzled when the idea of India is often referred to in the singular. Because that distorts the process. Firstly, should India have an idea? An idea. Shouldn't there be multiple ideas of India? Isn't that what it's all about? Our own experience, whether it's of the armed forces, whether we refer to the culture of Chennai, whether we refer to some other place. It's always taken as granted. So therefore, to suggest somehow and contrive the discussion into meaning that there is someone trying to destroy the Tamil language, there is someone trying to destroy a particular form of thing and make it into one uniform thing, is to my mind a serious distortion of India. Because it's not an issue any longer, and it's been forced into made into an issue. So that itself is very, very puzzling to me. Why? We've had many elections, right from general elections from 1952, 57, 62, etc., etc. Did any of these elections, was it ever preceded by the question that what is at stake is the idea of India? Ask yourself that. I mean, there are people who've seen multiple elections in India. Some of the younger people may not have. No, it was only in 2014 that the question of idea of India is at stake. Ye khatre pe hai, to again use a Hindi. Why? Surely there must be something puzzling about that. And why does a political party which accorded the right of self-determination as one of its tenets in 1947 become so wedded to the Constitution of India? And I'm referring to the legacy of Mr. Yechuri's own movement. So these are questions which have to be answered. So there is a context as to why this, because when people talk about constitutional patriotism, and underlying Mr. Yechuri's speech was this belief that the whole issue of India is not an emotional one. It has gone beyond the Treaty of Westphalia, and it is now something which is a juridical come constitutional process. That's, to summarize his argument, that was at the heart of it. Why is this coming up incessantly? Is it coming up? Sorry, Sita, did it distort you? Yeah, thank you. You know, a distorter recognizes distortions. I'm sure Mr. Yechuri will get his turn at a rebuttal at some subsequent point. That much is there. The question arises, you know, we have the notion of ideals is not new. Throughout history, and even if we take Indian history, there's been notions of what constitutes an ideal India. In some of the ancient texts, the notion of ideal would be Swarg. You know, the afterlife, moksha, some people would say you achieve that, that's your ultimate liberation. It's very much rooted in our tradition. Putting it into more political context, Gandhiji used the term Ram Rajya. A clever copywriter added Achhe Din. So all of these, in some way, talk about a very nebulous idea of what constitutes the ideal. And to some extent, some people would say, well, the ideal comes when nobody goes hungry. Everybody is educated. I don't think there's anybody who would ever say that those ideals are not relevant to our present condition. Therefore, when Baba Saheb Ambedkar, in 1949, spoke about this being just a first step, he was absolutely right. That was a first step, and that's an ongoing step of how a process of self-improvement, material self-improvement and other forms of self-improvement is a part of it. But again, the notion of ideal is never static. What was ideal at the time of Gautam Buddha would not be constituted as ideal today. We have moved on, we have accepted some, we have rejected ideas. It's a dynamic process. So, the notion of just the fact that we should give education to everybody, there should be decent health care, that nobody should go hungry, that there should be certain dignity for women, for all for gender equality, that there should be a right to beliefs, I think is very much a part of the right. But if you're going to read, but what is Indian about it? That's an interesting question. That's a pretty universal structure. So, does India become meshed into a globalized regime in the sense of values, in the sense of aspirations? Is there anything Indian about this? That's a question we have to address legitimately without anything. How much of the outside world, how much of the universal do we take in, and how much of the specifics do we retain? And that's the question, because ultimately, and this is a fear in a lot of people today, that in these debates, that what is specific about India is increasingly getting lost. The term constitutional patriotism, which is the fundamental concept which underlines the intervention of a lot of people, not least Mr. Yechury, is that above all, there is the Constitution. And the Constitution epitomizes the ideal towards which we move forward to. In a historical sense, this is a term which emerged in Germany after 1945. And the reason is very interesting. Germany went through a rather bad phase of a nationalism which went a little berserk and mad. And to establish its nationhood, minus the guilt, and because of the guilt of what had happened before in the 12 years of Hitler, the past was sought to be sanitized in a legal juridical term called the present, and therefore the constitutional patriotism. Now, if we are to accept the legacy of the freedom struggle, if we are to accept what, Madam, you have spoken about, that the idea of what constitutes Bharatvarsh, what constitutes Jambudip, predates the Constitution by many, many centuries. Are we to say, no, life began in 1947, and therefore all the values of India must necessarily be what is written in the Constitution? That anything outside the structure of the Constitution cannot be deemed legitimate, and therefore would automatically reflect majorities? Now, Mr. Yechury spoke about the fact that in 1947, in the Constitution, we did away with the term majoritarian. We did away with the term majoritarian, but we kept the term minoritarian, if we can use that word, as a legitimate category, which is still used. So there is no majority, but there is a minority. Now, fair enough, sometimes we can do this sort of thing. Now, is a society built exclusively for the present? This is the larger question which sometimes we have to address. Now, here I'm almost always tempted to revert to Burke, Edmund Burke, a very famous conservative philosopher whose intervention during the impeachment of Warren Hastings, a lot of you have read his very passionate defense of American independence, his critique of the revolution in France, and his interventions against Warren Hastings. Now, Burke once made this very thing, that ultimately society is a contract between three forces: the living, the dead, and the unborn. Now, in my view, that actually sums up the whole thing of what nationhood is all about. A nationhood is not contrived. There are contrived nations in the world. I'm not saying there aren't. Some of the European nations probably shouldn't, in some senses. Italy, some people would say, are multiple nations, but there was an Italian nation which was constructed around the 1880s, 1870s. So, Indian nationhood actually dates back far more. Now, we can talk about whether that nationhood was emotional. There is a term called the sacred geography of India, which some very distinguished academics have written about, which talked about the Indian unity being actually established on the basis of pilgrimage centers. Now, that's one idea. I'm not saying that's the only idea. But a sense of India predated the Constitution in many ways. Are we to reject all those constructs, partly because some of them might today have a slight brush of something which we today have called Hinduism? Can you take away culture? It's like those people who talk about secularizing Bharatnatyam. There's a powerful movement for it. There's a powerful movement for it. That Bharatnatyam can be done without the obeisance to the gods which preceded. Can you do it? You can do it. But are you enriching your country? Is it something to be afraid of? Is it something we should be terribly embarrassed about? Is it one of the regressive features of the past? And there are regressive features of the past. I'm so glad that in a temple in Maharashtra, it's a very important symbolic battle. As much as the Vaikom Satyagraha was for Gandhiji, the right of women to enter temple, to worship at the shrines. Now, of course, the implication always is that also is, and those who are championing it sometimes don't want to associate that women also believe, because they would rather that women didn't believe, that the right was conceded without the necessary belief structures. But these are important ones. So there are facets of the past which have to be discarded because it's a dynamic process. But to negate the past totally and say that that inheritance must not be carried over to the unborn is, to my mind, a destruction of the whole process. So this idea, you see, therefore, when we talk about future ideas of India, we can, of course, debate and we can have very meaningful discussions on what that education, what to teach. It's not merely education. I think the debates are about what to teach. And there are sort of some of these debates come in as well. Is Sanskrit a completely dead language? Should classical Tamil not be given the recognition it deserves? Why is it that today in India, Sanskritists have flocked to the West, and classical Tamil, the real contribution, is also being done in the West and not in India? And remember, this is a post-independence phenomenon when we embrace the idea of the scientific temper. Now, scientific temper in a peculiar sort of way was not that you promote science. It became also simultaneously, and that was the distortions that took place, we rejected heritage. We rejected antiquity. Just like the complications associated with sectarian conflict really began in India after the terms socialism and secularism were introduced into the preamble of the Constitution during the days of the emergency. Before that, these debates didn't take place. There might have been disagreements on the subject. Yes, there have always been disagreements on subjects. But to elevate it into a defining schism and establish as a powerful fault line, that didn't exist. And therefore, whenever you try and codify these things, the iron idea of India, rather than common sensibilities prevail. And at the end of the day, there is something called what some philosophers would call common decencies, a common agreement, a common idea of how we conduct ourselves, how we are. And the moment you try and put in a definition, you get into problems. Human beings are not things which you put into a laboratory and they have the same reaction. Some powerful philosophers believe that, which they believe that history in a sense is predetermined. You know, feudalism is followed by something else, is followed by something else. There are long, powerful adherents of that school, and they've done a lot to massacre the understanding of Indian history. But human beings are not like that. You cannot. And I believe that today, when we talk about the idea of India, you are actually bringing in many more divisive forces by trying to codify them. And by negating certain things which have a very powerful, established presence in our psyche and which cannot necessarily always be defined. And what brings the various parts of India together, why I, as a Bengali, can relate to a predominantly Tamil-speaking audience of Chennai, why there might be a little loose ends when it comes to perhaps talking to a Jat audience in Haryana. These are best left to absorb themselves in their own way. Put them into a straitjacket, constitutional or otherwise, you are trouble. The Constitution is very important for us because it sets these are the ground rules of political behavior. These are matters of the state, how the state conducts itself. But a society, a country, a civilization is much more than just the state. And this is basically the thought I would like to take, that acknowledge the vastness of India, acknowledge the complexities of India, but acknowledge those silken thread, the silken thread which binds it all. And if you say, put it under a DNA analysis and say, what is it made of? You're going to get into problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swapan Das Gupta. So we now know there cannot be one India. Can't be a idea. There cannot be a idea of India. Yes. And then the continued memory does not get arrested the moment we got independence and start afresh. And therefore, the continuum has a value which has to be accorded its space when we think of an idea, think of ideas of an India. Yes. Now, Mr. Ram. Anyone who wants to ask questions may write it down in a slip so that more questions can be asked and there will be somebody to collect it. Thank you.
Moderator, fellow panelists, friends, I welcome this interaction and debate because there are not enough opportunities these days to have a civil interaction, discussion, debate on great issues that matter. We see in our own state, although there are opportunities like this and Swapan and others commend them, you see in elections around the corner and we have major political leaders who hate each other, who do not talk to each other, who cannot bear any mention of the other to their face and so on. So even here, this kind of discussion on controversial issues, on contentious issues take place and I welcome that. Now, coming to the subject, I think we have covered a great deal of ground already, and it is not my intention to go over some of these issues, except to say whether I agree with them or not. Now, first, the topic itself. The series is called New Ideas for New India, and the event is titled Ideal India. Now, an ideal India is a utopian concept. Utopia, in the root meaning in Greek, means no place, describes a non-existent society in considerable detail, as they say. And the most celebrated, of course, as many of you know, are Plato's Republic and Thomas More's Utopia, written in the 16th century, the latter. So there is no such thing as an ideal India, in other words, a utopian India. The idea of actually existing India draws upon a rich history, as Sitaram mentioned, a glorious freedom struggle where these ideas were fought out, the different ideas of India, the rich resources of a great historical civilization, but something that is clearly a work in progress. Change is inherent in it, but there are also core values, core things that remain true over a very long period, if not for all time. Both have to be recognized. Emphasize only change and you lose sight of the core. Emphasize only the core and you are pleading for stagnation. So there is an interaction here that I think is very important. Secondly, there are good and bad utopias. And I'll come to the major example of a bad utopia in a little while, a bad utopia that disastrously divides, that is disintegrative, but a project, nevertheless, that can be dignified with the name of utopia. The idea of India as an existing reality deserves cherishing. Rabindranath Tagore, Ramachandra Guha has pointed out that the term idea of India occurs in a letter that Rabindranath Tagore wrote to a friend in 1921. He wrote that the idea of India is against the intense consciousness of the separateness of one's own people from others, which inevitably leads to ceaseless conflicts. In his celebrated novel Gora, published in 1909, the protagonist, in his journey from communalism, sectarianism, and religious conservatism to the ideals of humanism, says, and I quote, "For me, there is nothing bigger than my country. I am not beyond the pain and happiness, knowledge and ignorance of the total India. In me exists both Hindu and Muslim. All the castes of India are my caste," which means no caste. That's the meaning of this term. This is India's vision of human unity, and let us celebrate, let us remember and celebrate Tagore's sustained attack on narrow, bigoted, divisive, and disintegrated nationalism, which is not nationalism at all, because it divides people, which is actually anti-national. Now, Jawaharlal Nehru, in his Discovery of India, published in 1946, written from prison, recognized the complexity of India's past. He rejected the British imperialist historical narrative that presented India as a society of self-enclosed communities, always potentially or actually in gruesome conflict with one another. He also rejected the communal projection of India as a Hindu nation. He chose the middle path of seeing India's past neither as a meaningless storm nor as a glorified Hindu pageant, but as moved by a logic of what he called accommodation and acceptance. In his imagination, India appeared as a space of ceaseless cultural mixing. And to quote from the Discovery of India, an ancient palimpsest on which layer upon layer of thought and reverie had been inscribed, and yet no succeeding layer had completely hidden or erased what had been written previously. And this was an emphatic rejection of Winston Churchill's famous or notorious claim that India was, quote, a geographical expression, no more a simple country on the equator. Some of you may remember that or read that. So I think to reiterate the point made earlier, there are different ideas of India. Sitaram offered a useful typography of these ideas of India. The Congress idea, which is here, the left idea of India, which incorporated another important dimension, and then the Savarkar RSS idea of India, of Hindu Rashtra. These are the three major ones, politically significant or ideologically significant. Reference has been made to our constitution. Let us look at it. Now, it's not just the preamble, which of course says that, which was introduced in the 42nd Amendment Act, which and subsequently the 43rd Amendment Act repealed most of the obnoxious provisions of the 42nd Amendment Act, but significantly left this change in place. And that says, we, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, etc. We know that. And I also point out what has not been pointed out. This amendment was actually moved in the Constituent Assembly itself when they were discussing the draft constitution. And Dr. Ambedkar himself said there's no need to have this because this issue can be left open and so on. But is it a matter of only the preamble? If you look at the provisions of the Constitution, and I'll come to that in a minute, as interpreted by the Supreme Court of India, in a very famous and important judgment, Bombay versus Union of India, delivered on March 11, 1994, because the Constitution is finally what the Supreme Court says it is. The Supreme Court has interpreted the provisions of the Constitution, Article 356 also, but secularism specifically, as one of the basic features of the Constitution. It has held that secularism, a 9-member bench, and I don't see any judgment of the Supreme Court that is going to change or overthrow it in the conceivable future. 9-member bench, a constitution bench, delivering a very clear judgment on this point, unanimous, although there were different judgments. It held that secularism is a positive concept of equal treatment of all religions. This attitude, it pointed out, is described by some as one of neutrality towards religion or as one of benevolent neutrality. And then it went on to say that while freedom of religion is guaranteed to all persons in India, from the point of view of the state, the religion, faith, or belief of a person is immaterial. From the point of view of the state, the religion, faith, or belief of a person is immaterial. You can't have a more full-throated, unambiguous definition of secularism, or at least one of the basic principles of secularism, than this statement, than this assertion, or this ruling of the Supreme Court. To the state, it said, all are equal and are entitled to be treated equally. In matters of state, religion has no place. In matters of state, religion has no place. And if the Constitution requires the state to be secular in thought and action, the same requirement attaches to political parties as well. There is a sting in this judgment, which many of us have not really realized. The same attaches to political parties as well. The Constitution does not recognize, it does not permit the mixing up of religion and state power. This is the ruling of the Supreme Court. You can accept it, you can reject it, but the consequences are serious if you reject it. I will say, if you reject it, you are anti-constitutional, and then you can yourself answer the question, is it national or anti-national? We have a Republican Constitution here. So I think this is an extremely important point. I think the other aspects have been referred to, the existence of mass deprivations, despite the period of relatively high growth for a decade or more. We have not been able to make a significant enough dent on mass deprivation and poverty. I don't want to go into the details, but is it not possible, at least from now on, to have a stage 1 where within 5 to 7 years, assuming that relatively high growth will continue, we will be able to significantly do away with the worst forms of mass deprivations. If you do not, but the state here, whether it is the Congress or the BJP or even coalitions in the past, do they have the will to mobilize resources to do it? Other countries have done it. I don't want to go into detail. And then there's the question of inequality. That is, I don't want to deal with it because it's been discussed deftly or succinctly here. And I want to use the remaining portion of my time to look at the challenge to pluralist India. It's already been mentioned that India is multi-linguistic, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-everything. India is nothing if it's not pluralistic. The challenge to this has come to the fore. Let us be honest in recognizing it. And it has also made some ground. It has made advances. That because we have in the saddle the party of the Hindu right, led by an RSS pracharak turned charismatic mass political leader. They've come to power at the center. The party has a firm majority of its own, with flanking support from a family of militant Hindutva organizations that we used to say belong to the fringe. The fringe has come to the center now. It's no secret that this new dispensation is armed with an ideology and a socio-political program that are at odds with what we have been accustomed to for most of India's independent career. This is at odds with the values of our freedom struggle, although It was there in the freedom struggle, but not very important. But today, it's clear that it's at odds. It's at odds with the Constitution itself, not just with the preamble, with the basic structure of the Constitution, which nobody is going to take away. Unless you have a coup or something which overthrows this, which nobody thinks is a serious possibility, there's no way you can amend the Constitution because the Supreme Court has said this is part of the basic structure of the Constitution, unamendable. So whether you like it or not, you've got to lump it, you've got to accept this. So in this case, it is against the Constitution, it is anti-constitutional. So when the RSS Supremo, its Sarchang Chalak Mohan Bhagwat, proclaims that India is a Hindu nation and Hindutva it's an identity, he strikes a blow, a deadly blow, at the secular concept of Indian citizenship, at the Constitution itself, at the values of the freedom struggle and the values of our great historical civilization. Recognize it if you are honest. That's what it means. So I ask the question, without referring to any individual, what can be more anti-national than denying the plurality of India, than denying these values, than denying these basic principles of the Constitution? You can say, hypothetically, that an armed separatist insurrection is more dangerous. But does an armed separatist insurrection have any chance against the might of the Indian state? We saw in neighboring Sri Lanka, an extremely formidable organization, the LTTE, fought an all-out war against a much weaker state and lost badly, was eliminated. No way. That is not a real threat against the might of the Indian state, but internally, this disintegrative ideology, this kind of challenge undermines nationalism, which we understand to be the unity of people, all the people of India, all its citizens, and all those who live within its boundaries. That is what is at stake. And when we say that the idea of India is essentially to embrace this pluralism, this diversity, this fraternity of people belonging to all, and equality, and we are also a democracy, I think that's the idea of India that has to be cherished. Now, what are the two basic principles of the Constitution of secularism that the Supreme Court has held to be mandatory? One is the equality principle. Everybody is equal before the law, before state policy, before the Constitution. Secondly, don't mix up religion and politics, which is a principle that is honored in the breach. That is what we're doing now, blatantly violating what the Constitution mandates, as interpreted by the Supreme Court also. This is what's happening in our polity. But let's raise another question. Is this a real majority? We talk about majoritarianism, cultural nationalism, majoritarianism, and they say pseudo-secularism and all that. Is this a real majority? If it had been a real if elections are run by religious sentiment, and there's a so-called majority called the Hindus, then they would win elections all the time. Nobody would have any chance against a party that builds its politics on this platform of religious majoritarianism. What happened in the 2014 election? 31% of the national vote. The lowest share of the popular vote any party has won after independence that has got a majority. Any party that is. So is this majority? Do you have any claim to speak for the majority? At the same time, we have to be consistent and principled. It's not just majoritarianism that presents this challenge or threat. Minority communalism is also a threat. Jihadism is a major threat. It takes a toll on lives, on human welfare, and it undermines all that we are talking about, these core values. And also, interestingly, it strengthens the ideology of so-called majoritarian, the ideology, so-called communalism by the majority. So this is the danger that India faces today, a danger that has come to the fore alongside economic issues, alongside pressures on India's sovereignty in foreign policy, our independence. That's another issue that needs to be discussed, maybe on another occasion, in some depth. Where do we stand in relation to India's long proclaimed policy of non-alignment, independence in foreign policy? Are we really independent, or are we giving in to pressures? Are we making compromises on this? I'm not entering in that issue today, but those are issues that have to be reckoned with when we discuss how we are faring with respect to moving towards a utopian society, an ideal India, and so on, using concepts like the idea of India. So I think we have come to a stage where we have to recognize the threat. And I do not believe that sometimes people are dispirited when they see these poisonous ideologies and projects, political projects gaining ground. But as R.K. Narayan told Naipaul in 1961, Naipaul has written about it, V.S. Naipaul. They met in London and Naipaul asked what will happen after Nehru, and Narayan said, India will go on. A very simple statement, but a statement which, according to Naipaul, took very seriously and interpreted later in a different way. He himself moved towards something else. But we are confident that India has the resources, the resilience, the depth, particularly for its rich historical civilization, the values that came to the fore during the freedom struggle, and let us not forget our secular constitution, secular and democratic constitution. You may want this or that change, but you cannot take away these core values of our constitution. We are not Pakistan. We are not Saudi Arabia. We are not Bangladesh. We are not even Sri Lanka. This constitution is completely different. And I think as long as we have this constitution and the institutions, we have here people who have run elections with great distinction. And we know how people change their minds, how fickle it is from election to election. But at the end of the day, I think we have to recognize that India has the depth of resources, including moral resources, to resist and soon enough drive back these challenges and threats to what India deserves, the idea of India as proclaimed. Whether you accept the Nehru vision or the Tagore vision or something else, there is no place in India for a narrow, bigoted vision that rejects the idea of pluralism and that rejects fraternity towards minorities and so on. So I thought I'll end on this note. We have taken up quite a few subjects here, and there's more to discuss, but I think we have made some progress in this debate.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. So we now heard about accommodation and acceptance and the interaction between change and core, and of course, S.R. Bommai case, and how a nation which denies plurality is contrary to nationalism. And religious extremism, be it majority or minority, is not the idea of an ideal India. Thank you very much. Mr. Gurumurthy, we are running very much ahead of time. So before the question and answer, maybe there can be a lively interaction between the four panelists. So you've been very good. You've been very good.
It is very difficult to assemble an audience like this, and so I am particularly thankful to the Shastra University and the Hindu for presenting an audience which actually raises the level of the speakers. I hope that audience decides both the content and the quality of the speech, and I am extremely happy, despite the fact that Ram has been far more aggressive and determinative than Mr. Yechury. conclusive, judgmental. This is a dialogue. A dialogue is a process where there is an Indian attitude to dialogue, which is called Purvapaksha. That is the Indian Tarka Shastra. You study the other person's viewpoint first before being determinative about it. In fact, I didn't want to talk about the idea of cultural nationalism or Hindu Rashtra or Hindu nationalism, because I had come prepared to talk about something which is far more relevant today, the idea of Indian economic development. That is the first point I wanted to talk. But I don't know whether I should talk on what Ram forcing me into talking or what I wanted to talk. See, basically, all of us are arrested by the context. We are arrested by the context. We should take note of the context, but should not be arrested by the context, because the contexts are trivial, transitory, so impermanent. For example, take what happened to the world in the last 50 years or 60 years. And I will take you to immediately what I consider as the progress in the economic thinking of the world, which is quite amazing. In the year 1951, the United Nations gave a kind of a direction to the underdeveloped nations as to how they can develop and what they should do if they have to develop. And it is such today to consider it is a despicable way of handling the world and different countries in the world. And this was based on the Western anthropological modernity, which we are celebrating today as modernity. This was a book published by Princeton University. On 20th January 1949, Harry Truman, he announced how the world will move forward. In that address, he said that the world will move forward in the American way, in substance. And Princeton University put it together. Don't think it is some kind of a personal opinion. There is a whole lot of thought and thoughtful institutions behind it. And the Princeton University quoted what the United Nations said at the time. This is what the Western nations, through the United Nations, told the underdeveloped nations. There is a sense in which rapid economic progress is impossible without painful adjustments. Ancient philosophies have to be scrapped. Old social institutions have to disintegrate. Bonds of caste, creed, and race have to burst. Large number of persons who cannot keep up with progress have to have their expectations of comfortable life frustrated. Very few communities are willing to pay the full price for economic progress. United Nations Department of Social and Economic Affairs, 1951. This is 2 years after Harry Truman spoke. Then Princeton University says the report suggested no less than a total restructuring of underdeveloped societies. The statement quoted earlier might seem to us today amazingly ethnocentric, arrogant, and at best naive. Yet what has to be explained is precisely the fact that it was uttered and it made perfect sense. Tell me, will anyone here, the modernists, the secularists, and the people who look to the West, will disagree with this statement that there is a sense in which rapid economic progress is possible unless ancient philosophies are scrapped, old social institutions disintegrate, bonds of caste, creed have to burst? All of us are agreed on this, isn't it? This is what guided the world till 2005. There has to be a transcultural, political, economic, geopolitical approach to development. This was based on Western anthropological modernity, in which I see no difference between either Mr. Yechuri or Mr. Manmohan Singh. And I am going to establish how the whole thought process changed on its own in the year 2005, when the G20 nations amazingly completely went back upon it. G20 nations constitute the people who direct the economic discourse in the world. The U-turn came, the central bank governors and G20 nations declared in October 2005. We note that development approaches are evolving over time and thus need to be updated as economic challenges unfold. We will continue to review G20 according to sharing our experiences in implementation. We recognized that there is no uniform development approach that fits all countries. This was the reversal of both the Marxian approach as well as the approach of globalization, that every country will have to work out its own model. There is no fit-all approach for development. Each country should be able to choose the developmental approaches and policies that best suits a specific characteristic while benefiting from the accumulated experience over the last decades, including the importance of macroeconomic policies for sustained growth. There was not one echo of this declaration by the world leaders in the Indian discourse. The Indian discourse continued as it is in the Western anthropological modernity which defined our economic progress, whether it was in the socialist era or in the liberalization era. Later in May 2008, just ahead of the global meltdown, the World Bank said, in our work across the World Bank has learned the hard way that there is no one model that fits all. Development is all about transformation, taking the best ideas, testing them in new situations, and throwing away what does not work. It means, above all, the ability to recognize when we have failed. It is never an easy thing to do. It is even more difficult for an organization to do it. All governments or the World Bank, which constantly need to adopt the changing nature of the development challenge. So the World Bank also came to the conclusion that there is no fit-all model for development. But what is the model for development? The United Nations, which in the year 2010 that there is only one model for development, you have to throw away our past, go on a new developmental paradigm that will put you on the escalator for growth. The United Nations said in the year 2010, development must be nationally driven, rejecting one-size-fits-all approach to eradicate poverty and foster economic growth. In the year 2013, as Mr. Supandas Gupta said, culture is the basic drive of development. This is what the United Nations accepted. That is for setting the millennium goals. I am going to read out to you something. It is not enough to set global targets for all. We need to adapt to change. To mobilize people, we need to understand and embrace their culture. This means encouraging dialogue, listen to individual voices, ensuring that culture and human rights inform the new course for sustainable development. The UN report also said the UN officials today highlighted the need to recognize the vital role of culture in poverty reduction and sustainable growth, and to ensure that it is integrated into the post-2005 development agenda. It's a very vast kind of discourse which goes on. I don't want to read it. All that I want to say is that the Western anthropological modernity which governs the Indian discourse, which governs all that is spoken here, is not the future way of looking at the world in the economic sense. Culture is so important. Our traditions are so important. Our value systems are so important that we cannot reject all this, throw all this as useless, and hold on to something which is still very much an amateur product of the West-centric modernity, about which I want to say, where even our constitution, about which we have spoken so much, Bommai's judgment was quoted, and to say that Hinduism means religion and majoritarianism means Hindu rule. These are all the kind of discourse that take place while we are saying what is secularism, what is majoritarian, what is minoritarian. As Supandas Gupta rightly said, if there was no majoritarianism, we are perfectly happy. But are we to say that there is no minoritarianism in this country? The entire politics of this country runs on minoritarianism. Secularism is equated to minority rights. It is no more equal treatment of all religions. There is a special treatment for minority religion. That is what produces majority reaction. It will continue to produce majority reaction unless you address the root cause of what is nationalism. Then it takes us to what is nationalism. Ram was very vehement on what is Hindu Rashtra, what is Hindutva, what is Hinduism. I am going to read out the very Supreme Court judgment. It is not one judgment, it is a series of judgments in which how the idea of India, how the idea of Hinduism, Hindutva has been looked at by constitutional court, before which all arguments have been made, all political parties appeared. Everything started with a judgment of the Supreme Court in 1957, 78, if I remember right, a constitution bench judgment, whether Nicola Sundaram is a Hindu under the Hindu law. This is the point. You see how the court so beautifully dealt with this matter. This is quoted in the Hindutva judgment. It is putting together all the views of the Supreme Court on what constitutes Hinduism, Hindutva, and Indian cultural nationalism. That is also law. It quotes the Encyclopedia Britannica. Unfortunately, no Indian author will be quoted to make the point acceptable. We have to quote the Encyclopedia Britannica. Hinduism has been defined in the Encyclopedia Britannica as a civilization. And it goes on as a civilization, as a religion. Hinduism is an utterly diverse conglomerate of doctrines, cults, and way of life. In principle, note these points. Hinduism incorporates all forms of belief and worship without necessitating the selection or elimination of any. Can there be a better definition for secularism? Can there be a better definition for secularism? If India is not Hindu, it would never have been secular. The Hindu is inclined to revere the divine in every manifestation, whatever it may be. It is whether it is river or mountains or stones or anything. He only sees divine in it. The entire manifestation is divine. Ishavasya midam sarvam. You look at the entire, you only see God. You may or may not agree with it, but can you deny the expansiveness of the thought? And leaving both Hindus and non-Hindus, whatever creed and worship practices suit them the best. A Hindu may embrace a non-Hindu religion without ceasing to be a Hindu. Encyclopedia Britannica, quoted by the Supreme Court with approval. And since the Hindu is disposed to think synthetically and to regard other forms of worship, strange gods, diverse in doctrines, as inadequate or rather than wrong or objectionable, let us assume if there is a situation, if there is New Year's Day, it has nothing to do with Hindu, but we all go to temples. One more God, one more way of worship. We have no issue. The core of the religion does not even depend on the existence or non-existence of God or whether there is one God or many. Tell me, you classify it as religion and say anyone who expounds this thought is a religious bigot, he is communal, anti-secular. Where will the country stand if you ignore such an expansive idea? You say, if you are contravening this idea of Hindu, you are wrong. This is what the Supreme Court said. You know, the Supreme Court judgment on Hindutva quoted the Ayodhya judgment of Justice Barucha and himself and Justice Ahmadi. What do they say? Hinduism is a tolerant faith. What does that mean? What about the other faiths? Why you attach the word tolerance to Hinduism, you know? It is doctrinally tolerant. A Hindu as a person is as intolerant as a Muslim or Christian in person. It is the doctrine which makes him tolerant. That is the reference point. If the doctrine says, come on, I have to convert you, otherwise my religious personality is not fulfilled, then you are intolerant. That is the difference between Abrahamic faith and Hinduism. Unless you recognize it, you cannot define Indian secularism. It cannot be put on par. Hinduism cannot be put on par with Abrahamic religions. Unless you understand it, we cannot define Indian secularism. We cannot understand it. Secularism does not mean equal disrespect to all religions. It is equal respect to all religions, which means religions must mutually respect each other. That is the duty of the constitutions to ensure, polity to ensure, public life to ensure, media to ensure, intellectuals to ensure that each religion must respect each other. That is the Indian definition of secularism. But has the politics in India, politicians in India, political parties in India ever attempted this? You must respect others, but what others do to you, you should not bother, because that is secularism. Ordinarily, it is this tolerance that has enabled Islam, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Buddhism, Jainism and Sikhism to find their shelter and support this land. I will immediately take you to a brochure which was issued by the Israeli Consulate General there in 1967 about Jews, Indian Jews in Israel. The editor noted that Jews from all over the world came from 108 countries to rebuild the Israel nation. From 107 nations they came, maimed, beaten, butchered. Only from one country they came, recalling their best experiences. That is India. The Parsis came here, we welcomed them. There was no Article 29 at that time, there was no secularism at that time. It is the whole approach that everybody, we made Parsis into a caste, we made Jews into a caste. The Cochin king gave the plot next to his temple for the Jews to build their synagogue and told them, you should not be affected by our way of life. He gave them a principality to rule themselves. Who came and attacked them? It is the Dutch people, it is the Portuguese people, because they were supposed to have crucified Christ. They carried that enmity from there and attacked them here. It is the Mohammedan kings who defended them. What are we talking? Where is the depth in the Indian debate? Where is the depth in comparison of what is Hinduism and what is Abrahamic religions? Where is the religious target here? There is no doctrinal target against any religion in India. If at all, the Hinduism goes as far as to say, we don't know what is the truth. Against the determinative truth, this is the truth, you have to fall in line, otherwise you will be a kafir or heathen. That is not religion. So I feel that this debate lacks depth. We need to have a debate on what is Hinduism, what is Abrahamic religions. I am willing for a debate. I would like Mr. Yechuri or Ram to come for that debate. I want Shastra to make that. I want to make Shastra to make this as the part of debate. Is Hinduism consistent with Indian secularism? Is the doctrine of Hinduism consistent with Indian secularism? Is the doctrine of Islam consistent with Indian secularism? Is the doctrine of Christianity consistent with Indian secularism? I am willing for a debate. Thank you very much. There are many other points to be said, but the time is over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gurumurthy, for defining that the word Hinduism envelops everyone, and therefore that if that is not secularism, what is? And of course, you have also requested Shastra to have another discussion where two of these panelists today are going to be present. Now, as per the schedule, the Q&A starts at 6:35. So we have about 13 minutes. Yes. You can also have this if you want. Yeah.
I'm sorry? Podium.
They want to see you.
Am I not visible here? I thought I was fat enough to be noticed. Well, I mean, there's sufficient provocation for me to react. And taking excuse of my being a moderate, Mr. Gurumurthy exceeded his being an extremist, so to say. In thoughts. No, let's make one point very clear. I had come here for a discussion on what is the concept of an ideal India and what is idea of India. This has been converted into a discussion on Hinduism. Fine. Now, that is a subterfuge. But anyway, I'll grant him that right. And please, sir, please organize this other debate. I'll come. I'll definitely come and take you on. Because idea of India is not Hinduism or Islam or Christianity. Idea of India is that you are having a secular state where all religions will be respected, all rights of individuals to their religious faith will be respected, and the merits of religiosity can be discussed amongst religious leaders. Please discuss them, but don't involve the people and make them fight each other. And that is the most important point. Please discuss. We are not discussing Hinduism here. I was born a Hindu. I'm a communist today. You were born a Hindu. You are where you are. And all of us are there. So don't bring about my religion of my birth. But I'm not the first atheist under Hinduism. The first Brahmin atheist under Hinduism is Charvaka. And what did you do to him? Your own history tells you. So let's not talk about Hinduism. What we are talking of is Hindutva. And the man who coined this word Hindutva himself says very clearly in his own pamphlet, I'm talking about Savarkar, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, V.D. Savarkar. There are two Savarkar brothers. Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, he talks about saying Hindutva has nothing to do with Hindu religion. Hindutva is a political project. And the slogan he gave is what? Militarize the Hindudom. Hinduize the military. It is a political slogan. What we are saying today is anti-national, is that political slogan that emanates from misusing Hinduism. Misusing Hinduism. And that is why after hearing you, I think, having been also, trained and brought up, as I told you earlier, in these Brahminical traditions, I think we are approaching the Kali Yuga very fast, The reason why I'm saying is, Pavitranaya sadhu nam vinashaya chasusutam dharma samstapanarthaye sambhavami yuge yuge. Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says this. Vinashaya chatushtutam. Pavitranaya sadhu nam, to cleanse the society. If you want to cleanse the Hindu society, cleanse it with eliminating Hindutva. Hindutva is what has to be cleansed out of the Hindu society. So let's not talk about the merits or demerits and say, my God is better than your God. You can't tell a Muslim saying that my God is better than your God, so therefore you accept me. So let us not bring the debate into that. We are talking of the definitions and what all that you quoted about Hinduism, way of life, etc., etc. Please, let religion have its place. We will respect that place. Let individuals have their right to choose their religion. We'll respect that. And let us also have the right to be an atheist. You respect that. And that is the idea of India, where there's mutual respect for each other, and jointly and together we work for the creation of a better, prosperous India. So you call the debate, we'll definitely come. But also remember, when you talk of culture, 4 centuries, major part of this land's north of the Vindhyas. We are all lucky. I was also born in this city, in the Madras General Hospital, way back in 1952. So therefore, let us not, exchange labels of loyalty, where we are from. That's a different matter. But the whole of North, for 4 centuries, was under the Kushan dynasty. Reigning religion being Buddhism. For 4 centuries. longer than the Mughals, longer than the British. Did that not impact on the culture of Indians? Mughals, Dara Shikoh, he builds now on the top of the Dal Lake. He had built what is called the Pari Mahal. I see in the distinguished audience, my friend Gopal Krishna Gandhi, he wrote a wonderful poem, which is actually, those who are interested in English literature can look at it in terms of Shakespeare and Ibsen put together, in terms of the verse, where he talks of the Pari Mahal, which Dara Shikoh built. And the precariousness of that Pari Mahal, because Dara Shikoh built that having studied Sanskrit, translated the Vedanta. Upanishads have been translated by him. What the West knows as Hindu philosophy and Hindu religion and Hindu culture through the Upanishads is Dara Shikoh's translations into Persian and those translated into the European languages. Is that not part of Indian culture? Is it not part of Indian culture that Swami Vivekananda had to say that the Vedantic mind and the Islamic body is the future of India that I see in my mind? That is Swami Vivekananda. Today you lynch somebody on an allegation that he's got beef in his refrigerator. Today you kill two youngsters because they were herding their cattle to a cattle fair where they'll sell their cattle or buy. Somebody else buys the cattle. Is that tolerance? Is that culture? That is it. Distinguish between Hinduism and Hindutva. What is being practiced today is Hindutva. And that is why today when you talk of culture, modernism you talked. It may not sound acceptable. There was a very modern Iranian sociologist called Jalil Ahmed, who defined during the time of the Ayatollah Khomeini's revolution in Iran, talked about a concept called Western. They said these are all westernized revolutionaries who are attacking the religious foundations of Iran. Now that he talked about a distinction between Westernism and Westoxication. There is a Westernization and a Westoxication. Westoxication is being intoxicated by the West. Now, transform it to modernity. There is modernity, sir, and there is modernoxity. You can travel in a Mercedes-Benz, carry a Mont Blanc pen on your pocket, and wear your, I don't know the brand names, all sorts of clothes and things like that, but be extremely conservative and backward in your thinking. Now that is not modernity, that's modernoxity. What is being promoted today is modernoxity, not modernity. Modernity, the fundamental principle of modernity is equality. And that is the equality is that we are asking, that the idea of India can only survive and flourish if you have equality among this diversity. That is why it's not a question of appeasing some religion, and as far as I'm concerned, I can tell you, any appeasement to any religion is wrong, any attack on any religion is wrong. Please allow all people to choose their own religion. After all, what is religion? Final point. It is what we call in Sanskrit a pavitra bandhan between the Atma and the Paramatma. Who is that Paramatma? Only this Atma will decide. Nobody can interfere in the decision of this Atma on who his or her Paramatma will be. Not even that Paramatma can come and tell you, why are you praying for Rama and why not to Krishna? And nobody can deny this Atma from being an atheist, like Charvaka. So therefore, let respect that right, respect that liberty of an individual, which we should respect, and that is the foundation of an idea of India. That is what I think we'll have to do. Let us not therefore digress into the qualities and disqualifications of Hinduism versus Islam versus Christianity, the crucifixion, etc. Those who believe in that, believe in that. Those who do not, they believe in this. Or those who do not, don't believe in any. And that is India that I can think of, and that's our future. Thank you.
If I had 3 more minutes, possibly he would not have been able to intervene. I am talking about not Savarkar, I am talking about the Supreme Court judgment on what is Hindutva. In the Hindutva case, where it was challenged, appeal on the grounds of Hindutva is communal and violative of the Constitution and secularism. The Supreme Court says it cannot be doubted in view of the Constitution bench decisions of this court. It is not only this decision, but they are quoting variety of decisions. That the words Hinduism or Hindutva are not necessarily to be understood and construed narrowly, confined only to their strict, please let me have a say, quote only the Supreme Court. I am not speaking. I am quoting the Supreme Court judgment. I am not quoting Savarkar. I am not quoting Golwalkar. I am not quoting someone else. I am quoting the Supreme Court. All of us should respect this judgment. We can debate this judgment. This is not confined only to strict Hindu religious practices unrelated to the culture and ethos of the people of India, depicting the way of life of the Indian people. This is Hinduism also. This is Hindutva also. How do you say this is religious and dismiss it? This is a matter for debate. You cannot escape this debate. By classifying Hinduism as a religion and saying we don't want to distinguish or dialogue whether it is Christianity or Hinduism, there is an element of Hinduism divorced from religion. And you are yourself saying there is an Atma Bandha between the Paramatman and the Atman. I am extremely happy you are accepting religion is not an opium of the masses. Because this is the Indian view. If Charuvaka was called a Rishi, Japali was called a Rishi, Bahuka was called a Rishi, though his economic model is precisely the same as Greenspan's economic model. The term, considering the term Hinduism or Hindutva, per se as depicting hostility, enmity or intolerance towards other faiths, proceeds from an improper appreciation and perception of the true meaning of this expression, emerging from the detailed discussion in the earlier authorities of this court. Can I not say in a debate, Mr. Yechuri, your interpretation is based on improper appreciation and improper perception of the true meaning of this expression, and the Constitution bench of the Supreme Court gives a different view. That is what I said, we need to have a debate. It cannot be a tit for tat. It has to be a debate, wholesome debate. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wish to reiterate the same point, but with a slightly different angle. We did not discuss Hinduism, not for I didn't utter a single word, if I remember right, Hinduism. It was exclusively on Hindutva. And Hindutva, Hindu Rashtra ideology, the poison it injects, the atrocities that it inflicts. I also spoke about jihadism. So it was exclusively on secularism. Now the point is, I studied history in college. I read history in college and have followed it. And one of the things we learned from great historians is don't romanticize the past. Don't overgeneralize about this or that. You speak about Hinduism and tolerance. There are numerous episodes of intolerance, atrocities. Very recently, what do you say about Gujarat, the pogrom in 2002? We condemn the anti-Sikh pogrom of 1984, but we equally condemn the pogrom and under what banner did it sail? Who perpetrated it? At that point, I agree also there were terrorist attacks, there was extremist attacks. You call it reaction, but it is as poisonous as any terrorist has inflicted on India or any other place. So this myth of universal toleration all the time, absolute toleration is bogus. It is a myth. This we have to recognize. consider another point. Hinduism. Who was the greatest Hindu of the 20th century? You can argue it, but I would say Mahatma Gandhi. Vivekananda, okay, Vivekananda, Mahatma Gandhi, whoever in that. But what happened to Mahatma Gandhi? Who was the assassin? What ideology infected that assassin and made him go for this? Why did they kill? There was a purpose to eliminating Mahatma Gandhi, who I would consider the greatest Hindu of his age. Arguably, Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda, who also said that it is not just toleration. Hinduism is not just toleration, but accepting all religions as true. Correct? In the Chicago Address, 1893, correct, Gurumurthy? Now, we can argue that they do not accept all religions as true. That's another matter, but toleration is precious. So I think this debate cannot be allowed to go along the false trail of discussing Hinduism, its triumphalism, the greatest religion on earth, and so on. We are not going that path. We are talking exclusively about an ideological and political project that goes back a long way into perhaps in the early part of the 20th century, certainly the first half of the 20th century, and made progress. And we have to come back on it. So with my friend Gurumurthy, I disagree. I share some of your ideas on economic independence. We have had this discussion before, and in a sense, I regret we didn't allow you to focus on that more. But this is the issue that has come to the fore. You tried to shift ground by saying this debate lacks depth. But we were not talking about Hinduism. We are talking about Hindutva and this poisonous ideology. The Hindutva ideology is as dangerous, as extremist, as destructive, as anti-national, as terrorism, jihadism, and so on. That is the point. I stated strongly, but that's the point we are debating here, and that's the point that the title that Shastra and the Hindu proposed for this. That's how I understood the title, and that is how Prabha started it.
Yeah, I thought I will...
Only one word. Supreme Court also spoke of Hindutva clubbed with Hinduism.
There is a question for you. I will raise the question and then you can add whatever you want to add. Raise the question. Yes. You say codifying India into words or laws like secularism distorts India. Does this mean you are opposed to the framing of the Constitution? What alternative would you have proposed if you had been 1947-50?
Yeah, I'm grateful for that compliment. You see, okay. I think I'll start off with a certain disability, if I may say so, in these discussions on Hinduism and Hindutva. In sort of public interventions, I have a rule which I borrowed from a person called Alistair Campbell, who's to be an advisor to Tony Blair. And his motto was, "We don't do God." So I have that same disability. I don't like bringing God into any discussion. Now, the basic point about it is, it's not a question of God. It's a question of certitudes. I think one thing which Sitaram brought out in his second intervention was that there is no such thing as one view. He pointed out that there is a multiplicity of philosophical / religious traditions which exist in India. Whether you club them as religion or you club them as pure philosophy is a matter of conjecture. I do not have the expertise to be able to pronounce on that. But the whole point is that what it goes on to show is that to see India in terms of just one color, one strand, and to say atheism is to be debunked. No, atheism cannot be debunked because it's a powerful intellectual current which predated Marxism. It's an indigenous current. So, let's move on to this thing. And how does this affect contemporary visions on the idea of India? The moment you take Mr. Ram's attitude that what we witnessed in 2014 was an illegitimate usurpation of power. And that's, I'm sort of quoting the subtext of what Mr. Ram said. And therefore, it is the job of enlightened citizens like Mr. Ram to rescue the people from themselves. That, in his view, is that democracy, if it doesn't correspond to a particular view, is not democracy at all. That is the point, that there is an inherent intolerance which marks the debate on the idea of India, because it is said the idea. Mr. Ram spoke about non-alignment being a part of the idea of India. Now that's astonishing. A functional foreign policy issue to be elevated to the realm of a national philosophy. Because it is purely functional. Your identity as an Indian does not depend on non-alignment, be it in favor or against. The whole point is that you saw that there was a monopoly view of what constitutes India. When that monopoly view gets challenged, you say this is unconstitutional. Therefore, the basic idea that views have to be contested, views have to be fought along, is there. What is the importance of the Constitution? The Constitution is basically a set of ground rules. What you can do, what you cannot do in the functioning of the state and public life. It does not define your identity as an Indian, because that identity as an Indian is not singular. They are trying to say that the Constitution is the be-all and all, that your entire being, your national existence is epitomized in the Constitution. I would argue humbly that the purpose of a Constitution is very different. The French, for example, if you were to say the French should be defined, their extreme form of whatever they have of secularism, the disrespect to all religions, if you might call it that, approach. Now, what is the meaning of French constitutional patriotism? I mean, the French have had more republics in the past 100 years than Zaza Gabor has had husbands. I mean, can you talk about a French constitutional patriotism? What is the national identity of France? And there is a national identity of France. And it's expressed through other things. It's expressed through its art, it's expressed through its culture, it's expressed through a form from its cuisine, which Sita likes. That is the form. So no two country. In other words, there is an inheritance which goes beyond formal political institutions. I have a great deal of skepticism with Mr. Gurumurthy that whether the Supreme Court is always competent to define Hinduism. Actually, it didn't define Hinduism. It got the Encyclopedia Britannica to define Hinduism. So leaving everything to the courts to define is neither here nor there. It's a most unsatisfactory solution, and it gives ideas to judges as to who's running the country. So let's not get into this debate on religion. Let's get into the thing that we recognize the Constitution for what it is. But the Constitution is only a part of our national existence. It is not the whole. And let us try to appreciate the whole.
Thank you. There is, it's not a question in the real sense. It says, ma'am, could you please reserve one question after the vote of thanks, because no one stays for vote of thanks and national anthem. I think after a discussion of an idea of ideal India, everyone here should stay for the national anthem, and I will not reserve question after that. Yes? Now this to Mr. Gurumurthy. You said culture must be hold for economic development. Culture is a dynamic thing. Sati was our culture, caste is still. Do you want this to hold for economic development?
In fact, I am grateful to Ram as well as Mr. Yechuri. Why don't you talk more on economics where we may find some common ground? Then on Hindutva and Hinduism where we are divergent. See, you cannot understand the Indian idea of development unless you understand caste. This has been my finding after 15 years of traveling across the country from Ludhiana to Batala to Rajkot to Jamnagar to Morbi to right down to Thoothukudi. I spent 14 years studying the economic architecture of India, which is not available in any textbook. Nobody has theorized it. If you look at who developed Ludhiana, it is a community called Ramgadiyas. Who developed Morbi, it is a combination of Patels and Muslims. Who developed Rajkot, which was a desert, into a very prosperous place, it is Patels. Who developed Virudhunagar, it is Nadars. Who developed Shivakashi, it is Nadars. Who developed Tirupur into an export center, which is visible at the global level, it is the Gounder community. I have written in the Hindu, there is complete nexus between economic development through entrepreneurship, which the caste system promotes. In fact, the economic census 2014-15 brings out this fact even more clearly, which has also been studied in the earlier version of this report by the Harvard University scholars, that 58 million micro business units of India, which provide 50% of the Indian GDP, 90% of the non-farming employment, is driven by backward class, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe to the extent of 65%. And they get only 4% of their financial assistance from banks, and the rest of it is provided at 60%, at 80% interest, 120% interest by money lenders. You can never develop India unless you finance them. This is the kind of debate that is needed. And you say caste in politics is dangerous. Caste in economics is productive. Are we willing to debate it? Caste validity in politics is recognized. Now caste is supposed to be part of the secular architecture of India. But caste as part of economics is more important. It is a development vehicle. It has been studied by UNIDO. There are 2,800 industrial clusters in India, including artisan clusters. Most of them driven by communities. There is nexus between community because community is social capital. And exactly the reverse is the Western model based on individualism. I am going to quote the Marshall Shalins, an American anthropologist, where Mr. Yechuri and me will completely agree on this quote. A late classic of the genre was Walter Rostow's Stages of Economic Growth. This was written in 1957 by Walter Rostow, with this unilinear sequence of 5 development stages from traditional societies to the age of mass consumption. Rostow must have been among the first to perceive that the culmination of human social evolution was shopping. This is America. If one of my friends said, if the malls are closed down for 1 week, Americans will not know what to do. And an American student, he wrote a PhD thesis. I am quoting from that. It has been argued that consumerism rather than democracy or capitalism won the ideological battle of the 20th century and is the defining characteristics of modern developed nations. The consumerist zeal is palpable in US, where consumerism enjoys near hegemonic status, tied to notions of freedom, choice, economic prosperity. Consumerism is valued to such a degree that George Bush Sr. declared National Consumer Week in 1989, American presidency project, essentially stating the consumerism is both a right and a virtue. After the terrorist attacks of 9/11, George Bush asked the Americans to go to shopping, claiming if the Americans did not feel free to shop, terrorists had already won the war. Consumerism is so central to the American psyche that people who willingly curbed their consumption have been accused of being un-American. I will tell you the economic consequence of it. The American family savings in the total savings of America was 80% in the year 1960. In the third quarter of 2006, it became minus 20%. The corporate savings, which was 20% of the national savings, became 120%. Private savings got transferred to the corporates. This is consumerism. Is this the development that India needs? Is there any political debate in India? Are the economists debating? The economic establishment in India is driven by the American Anglo-Saxon model. That is the greatest danger to Indian nationalism. Where probably Ram, me and Yechuri will be agreed. I want the media to take up this debate. And America today is the most borrowed nation in the world. It is borrowing at the rate of almost $2 trillion a year. 75% of the global savings is generated in Asia. 2/3 of the global savings is borrowed by only one country. Its borrowing strengthens the American dollar, just like if you go and borrow 1 crore from a bank, the bank is after you. But if you borrow 5,000 crores from the bank is at your beck and call. This is what Venkatramanan, former Reserve Bank governor, wrote. Borrow more money, the bank will pay attention to you. If you borrow less money, the bank will harass you. The whole world is praying for America's welfare because everybody has lent money to America. You know how much money India has invested in America? $200 billion. That is the dollar component of our foreign exchange reserve. This is the matter for debate. I feel Shastra must arrange a debate on what should be the economic model of India, and what all political parties are doing is precisely what is not in the national interest, and I would partly hold even the current dispensation following the same model. Thank you very much.
This is exactly what I wanted to hear. I mean, I wanted him to say. That my only appeal is, and that's why I took on a very moderate note in my initial comments, because I wanted a sort of a moderate discussion. But since it went on the way it went on, but the point is, sir, Mr. Gurumurthy, why don't you organize such discussions on issues that we can agree and the country can benefit, rather than organize on discordant issues? Please, that is my appeal.
I think with this, we'll come to an end of this discussion. Before we all came here, there was some murmur among the panelists. Mr. Gurumurthy will always have the last word. Now, Mr. Yechuri has made sure that he doesn't have the last word. Now, Dr. Vaidya Subramaniam said at the end of this discussion, we will arrive at a solution of what the idea of ideal India. I don't think we have. But I do find a common thread, and I think I will touch only upon the common thread to close my remarks on. Mr. Yechuri talked of an inclusive model and an equality, which is one man, one value. Each one is equal to the other. Then Mr. Gurumurthy quoted from the Supreme Court judgment about Hinduism, and he said, can there be anything better than this? The court spoke about including everyone. And then we moved to Mr. Ram, who again said that there cannot be any imbalance amongst religions. And he also spoke about mass deprivation, which has not been addressed. And therefore, he was also talking of an inclusive India. And Dr. Sopan Das Gupta, if he spoke about there cannot be just one idea, which means we include all ideas, ideas that came from before the Constitution and ideas that flowed after the Constitution. And therefore, we are at a space where we agree that all these ideas have to be included, the different voices have to be assimilated if we have to fashion a new India. And I'm extremely grateful to the 4 panelists. I was intimidated at first. I don't think I need have been. They have been extremely good panelists. Thank you very much.
Gratitude unexpressed becomes ingratitude. I now call upon Mr. Rajiv Lochin, CEO and Managing Director of Kasturi and Sons Limited, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Let me start by placing on record our deep gratitude to this Sadas, the discerning public of Chennai that have assembled here, and for all the Indians who are watching us on live streaming that has been happening over the last 3 hours. Justice Prabha Sridevan, our sincere gratitude. You were a moderator par excellence, balance, poise, grace. Thank you for being here and making this happen. Our 4 panelists, Dr. Swapan Dasgupta, Mr. Ram, Mr. Gurmurthy, Mr. Sitaram Yechuri, you brought energy, you brought passion, you brought strong points of view, and you lit the stage up today. Thank you very much for your presence and participation. And lastly, Shastra University, our partners in creating this platform. Dr. Vaidhi Subramanian was led from the front, and all the members of Shastra University for helping make this happen. Personally, for me, the Hindu and the Hindu group have 2 missions, and I feel we've delivered on that mission today. One is to shape public opinion, and second is to reflect public opinion. Thanks again for being here. Really look forward to the next edition. There are many topics that have been teed up, and I'm hoping that we'll have the chance to set this up for all of you. Do come back next time. Thank you.
I request all of you to rise for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल वंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जाहे तव शुभाशिष माहे गाहे तव जय गाता जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे जय